And now I'd like to welcome someone that actually needs no introduction. Please welcome Sizwe Nxasana, founder of Future Nation Schools and the Sifiso Learning Group, for our keynote reflecting on trends in education and a case study around coding and robotics. Sizwe, the floor is yours. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Thank you very much, Stafford, for the introduction, and thanks to Tracy also for the opening remarks that you made. Today's webinar is a really important one, and I'm sure you all know we've attended many of similar webinars, but we thought it was really important to have this webinar today, especially given the progress that has been made by particularly the Department of Basic Education with the introduction of coding and robotics as part of the curriculum, starting with a pilot now, but fully implementing coding and robotics in 2025. As you all know, there are major developments that are taking place when it comes to digital skills. We see it every day in our everyday lives, the way that we interact with one another, the way that we connect through various platforms, the way we buy things, including everyday groceries. All of that has changed. But what it has done is to create huge opportunities for those who have the skills and the competences to participate and actually create employment for themselves as well as for others in this digital age. The IFC estimates that there are some 230 million digital skilled jobs that will be required in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. And that's quite a significant number. But it requires that all of us work together, because if we don't pull together as civil society, business, working with the Department of Education to close the gap, the skills gap will simply just increase. At the current pace of change, because things are happening very quickly, skills inequality is going to actually increase quite significantly. So it is our jobs, for those of us who are in education and in business, to work with government to close this gap so that a lot of our young people can meaningfully participate in the economy. In Tracy's opening remarks, she mentioned that there's a development in our country, not just to look at certification, but to look at skills and competences that a lot of our young people need. Because very often you find that the education systems throughout the world often lag behind the developments in education or the developments in the area in the world of work. So by working together and having, for instance, situations where industry can already certify learners whilst they're still in the education system, we can begin to close the gap. I'll make an example later on just in terms of how this works, especially when it comes to micro-credentials and multi-certification. The world of work has changed very quickly, and it continues to change. But we continue to see this opening gap between supply and demand, especially when it comes to digital skills that are required. So it is important, and it's really pleasing to see that our government, especially under the current administration, welcomes the participation of the private sector and civil society in closing the gaps that exist, especially in the world of work. So we are looking at a situation, for instance, now where there's a huge amount of work that is being done of the private sector working with TVET colleges, as an example, the private sector working with schools, working with the Department of Basic Education, or working with the Department of Higher Education and Training, which are all really important if we are going to address the problems and the challenges that we face in the area of skills and competencies for the future. The introduction, as I said earlier, of coding and robotics as a subject, which has started now and is going to be fully gazetted by 2025, is a really important development that will create opportunities and hope for a lot of our young people to meaningfully participate in the economy. Once we do this, I think we need to also promote areas such as entrepreneurship, because the world of work is changing really quickly. And what we need to do is to make sure that we're imparting not just skills such as coding and robotics, but skills such as running businesses. We've seen, for instance, in our own situation at Future Nation Schools, where we have a number of young people who get certification. They may get certification for Java, for Python, as an example, or C plus or CC plus, and they start applying those skills to earn a living whilst they are still at school, which is a very important development because, as we know, as Stafford Macy indicated earlier on today, there are a lot of new skills and opportunities that are emerging for young people. And all we need to do, especially as those of us who are working in education space, is to create these opportunities for young people to work together with government and support government in its efforts to reform the education system. One of the areas, it's actually a very big bugbear for me, is how I see the disconnect between especially basic education and higher education and institutions of higher learning that produce our teachers. I find it really frustrating sometimes when you listen to people in the higher education sector saying, no, they're waiting for the curriculum, for instance, on coding and robotics to be gazetted before they start training teachers in those critical areas. Which means that, by the time, if gazetting happens, for instance, in 2025, we as a country are only going to start having teachers that are properly qualified to teach coding and robotics somewhere around 2028, assuming that it takes about 2 to 3 years to actually qualify someone as a teacher. So as a country, I think we need to work together, not just with the Department of Basic Education, but also with the Department of Higher Education and Training, to close the gap so that we're producing quality teachers that have the skills and the competencies, because you cannot impart something you don't have. In other words, teachers as mediators of learning cannot produce skills such as creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and so on, if they themselves do not have those skills. And it is really incumbent upon those that produce teachers, that prepare teachers, to make sure that our teachers are properly qualified and that also they have the competencies and the skills that they require. And we need to look at, what the role of education is at the end of the day. And I think the Department of Basic Education is really showing the way. There are a number of new subjects that have been launched very recently. For instance, if I look at the 3-stream curriculum that has now been introduced, which includes the technical curriculum and the vocational curriculum. It is about producing functional skills. It is about producing competencies amongst young people so that we can deal with the issue of inequality and unemployment that we face in our country. When I look back, when we started at Future Nation Schools about 6 years ago, we started really small. We introduced coding and robotics in the lower grades, as well as a few of the higher grades. And, if you look back today, by the time that our students and our learners get to grade 12, as I indicated earlier, they're already getting IBM certification, they're getting Cisco certification, they're getting Java certification, and so on. And these are really skills, important skills that they can do something with, even whilst they're still continuing. And one of the skills that we are imparting on our young people is lifelong learning, to understand that the area of technology is such that you cannot just acquire a skill and you stop there. You need to continuously, as a young person, or even as an old person for that matter, continue empowering yourself and acquiring those skills that are going to continue to make you relevant in the world of work. And that's why we integrate coding and robotics with a lot of other areas in computing that include areas such as computing systems, data and information management, digital tools and collaboration, blockchain technologies, data science, and so on. Because all of these things talk together. They're all about building the skills and the competencies that are important. And actually, one of the things that we've realized as we started to teach coding and robotics is that where young people, students, fear mathematics and physics, as an example, because there's a lot of learn through play with coding and robotics. We've been able to now teach a number of areas that are difficult in mathematics, such as algebraic formulations and equations, integers or fractions, or physics, using coding and robotics. And it's amazing how much that demystifies, some of these subjects that would have been very difficult or maybe feared by our students. But to use it by using coding and robotics, you are able to create an environment where they're not so much feared anymore, because they do them as a play, as a build and code the robots, which is actually something that is a really positive development in the production of skills. And when you look at the issue of data, I'm very encouraged by the fact that we have SA Connect, and the government is looking at connecting all the 25,000 schools by 2025. I hope we are going to be able to reach this target, because if we do, we really open and pave the way for a lot of our young people or unemployed people out there to meaningfully participate in the economy. This will make the cost of access to connectivity and data hopefully a lot more affordable and accessible, regardless of where people are. We operate the school, for instance, on the outskirts of Soweto in Flaof. It's really a major problem to have connectivity. And you can imagine how difficult it is in the rural villages, in the deep areas such as the Northern Cape and so on, to get connectivity, which essentially means to the extent that those schools and communities are not connected, we're leaving a lot of people behind, which will continue to perpetuate this issue of inequality and unemployment and poverty amongst our people. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. The opportunity for partnership with a lot of other partners, the Sasol Foundation and Tshikululu have been amazing partners with us in providing support to government, especially the Department of Basic Education, to make technology, digital skills, coding and robotics available to a lot of our young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sizwe. The insights, the numbers. 230 million jobs will require digital skills by 2030. That's an incredible number. I know in my profession, I'm in the technology industry, and cybersecurity is such a massive job opportunity for kids out there in terms of the skill sets required. In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges facing South Africa today? If you could give us those 1 to 2 or 3 challenges that you think stands in the way of your project, and what it may achieve over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, the issue of connectivity for me is a really important one. I happen to travel quite a bit to Central Africa, places like Rwanda, and you see how those countries are developing. There's cohesion in terms of looking at all the building blocks, whether it's power, electricity, but particularly connectivity and education, and building ecosystems around them, which includes, for instance, how we think about devices and creating accessible and affordable devices, an example, how we train our young people. I think we are on the right track, but I would really like to see a lot more faster rollout of some of these things, such as, for instance, SA Connect.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I think broadband connectivity is the lifeblood and the lifeline to all of these initiatives. And in terms of, from your perspective, what are the top 1 or 2 skills? If you had to speak to a student out there today that may be listening to this, in particular the folks on the ground, the kids out there, a grade 10, a grade 11 kid, what are the skill sets that you think are top demand focus areas right now?
I like the campaign that Charles Mulapisi started on, of having one programmer per household. I think it's a very powerful, audacious goal. And for me, if we can have one developer per household, and obviously connectivity would be a very important facilitator and enabler of that, I think we can really meaningfully dent our problem of unemployment in our country.
Sizwe, one that I get often, and I think, let me ask you this, and you may get this often, and I'd love to hear your response. I get this often when I'm on stage or after I've done an engagement at the universities, etc. And that is, we talk about fourth industrial revolution, we talk about robotics, we're talking about coding, but the basic infrastructure in the country is not there. Energy, political will, etc. Give me your view in that regard. Does the substrate truly in our country support these initiatives?
Yeah, so my view is this. I think, as I said in my talk, there's an open door that is really widening, especially when it comes to mobilizing private sector, civil society, labor unions or teacher unions, particularly, to work with government to deal with some of the problems. Because I think it's quite clear to government and to everybody, actually, as civil society, that government cannot solve all of these problems by itself. And therefore, whether it's a problem of power or the problem of unemployment or the problem of connectivity, we're going to have to hold hands together. For instance, if you look at, reforming curriculum, very often you find that the private sector sits on the side, and we are the ones, though, or the private sector are the ones that should understand the kind of skills and competencies that are required from young people. And that's why I think we need to understand how government works, as especially the private sector, and vice versa. And we're starting to see a lot of that happening. Organizations such as the National Education Collaboration Trust, as an example, are very good platforms for collaboration to solve some of these intractable problems that we face as a country.
That's amazing. And I think that civil society, I think the private sector, government coming together, that stitching in that fabric, that's the underlying fabric that makes all this happen. I completely concur with you. Doomsday prediction. And that's the question, that's that doomsday scenario question. The one that I get asked often when I'm on stage or when I engage at universities and I talk about technology is the fear that if we do not catch up here, if we do not do what you folks are encouraging us to do, that Africa, sub-Saharan Africa specifically, runs the risk of being disintermediated. I mean, Yuval Noah says it so beautifully when he says the dilemma, the challenge that we have moving forward is not the exploitation of the poor by the rich. It is actually the irrelevance of the poor to the rich. As we move into this new world of automation and AI, etc. Just give me your views in terms of that. Where are we at as a continent relevant to that?
I think we all know that the developed world has always looked at Africa as a continent which is rich in a lot of our mineral resources that has to be exploited for the benefit and the growth of the developed world. I think it is important for us to realize that we can do something about that, as opposed to complaining about colonialism. Yes, it is a reality, but there are a lot of things that we can do as countries in Africa to change the status quo, to train and educate our people, to become entrepreneurs, to become innovators, and we can do a lot of those things. Because if we don't, obviously the West and the developed world will always want to keep Africa poor so that it can be exploited. And we continue to be consumers of products and innovation and technologies that are developed elsewhere, whilst at the same time we allow the developed world to exploit our natural resources that we have.
It's profound. I think what an opportunity lies ahead of us, and it's literally ours to lose. Sizwe and Nxasana, thank you so much.